I think we are now recording. I'm trying to get this so we can see this better. And I still think that's too big. Hold on. There we go. Okay, French and Indian War. Good morning. I hope you guys are having a great Wednesday. We are going to look at this PowerPoint as we move through the French and Indian War. We ended yesterday talking about the Albany Congress, Albany Plan for Union, and if you look, we don't really go in depth in our notes, so this PowerPoint should be a better look at the French and Indian War. And again, look at that date, 1763. It's an important date. And this is what we're answering. Why was 1763 a turning point in British colonial relationship? It is a key date, truly almost as important as 1776, because without 1763, probably would have been a 1776, but just not that soon. So North America in 1750, and you can see I've really tried to make sure that you understand that every European nation was on the continent of North America. And hopefully in this map you can see just how large of a presence each one of those places had. And if you look, it's really at this point the French that have the largest claims. If you think about the fact that that British claims up in Hudson Bay is really just a lot of ice. And if you look in particular in this area right here, this is the area that we're talking about, that Ohio Valley. This is the disputed area where the French and Indian War actually begins. So our first class, we already talked about that, is in the Ohio Valley up by Fort Necessity, the Ohio Valley, and again, look at where this is at. This is western Pennsylvania in the eastern regions of Ohio. And here is yesterday the little flag that I was telling you about that a lot of people believe is associated with the American Revolution. It's really the French and Indian War, and it's this idea that if we don't all work together to try to ban as 13 solid colonies, we're going to die. The Albany Congress is going to fail. The Iroquois break off relations with the British and threaten to trade with the French. And again, that's what we discussed yesterday, that these Indians are always going to do what's in the best interest of them, and they have no allegiance to the British or the French. It's just whomever gives them the best deal. In 1755, Great Britain decides to eliminate French presence from North America. They decided, we're done, we're going to kick the British or the French out, and they start up in and around Newfoundland and Nova Scotia. They attack the Ohio Valley, the Mohawk Valley, Acacia, and General Braddock is going to be killed, which is a great detriment to the British, as he was, again, one of their better generals. In 1756, war is formally declared, and Native American troops exploited both sides. So in this aspect, Native Americans really kind of come up on the better end of the deal in this one, because they're going to work for the best deal for both sides of this. So this right here is a really important slide, so much that I would actually copy that into my notes if I were you, and I would really pay attention to this when you're starting to think about that colonial identity. So the colonial army is fighting with the British only after William Pitt pleads with them, please help us, and William Pitt, the Prime Minister, says, if you fight with us, we'll pay you back any expenses. So, method of fighting, Indian guerrilla-style tactics, and again, that's what the colonials learned in their fighting with the Indians. And the British are going to march in formation. Military organization, colonial militia served under their own captains. So these were more like what we think about as like guard troops, right? That they serve in their neighborhoods, in their communities with people they know. British officers want to take charge of the colonials, and that is going to be a very sticking point. As far as military discipline, no military discipline with the colonials. They all, again, part of this colonial neighborhood types, they all viewed each other as the same. whereas the British were going to have drills and very tough discipline, corporal punishment, lashings, public lashings for infractions. Finances, resistance to raising any taxes. Again, this is going to obviously be something that we're going to talk about a lot in the coming chapters and years for the colonial people. They don't want their taxes raised. And the British say, hey, you should pay for your own defense. And the colonists say, we would not have needed a defense if you had not attacked the French. And their demeanor, casual, non-professional, and the demeanor of the British prima donnas, with the captains being served high tea with china, and it really was a different world between the officers in the British Army and the officers in the colonial militia. So this slide is really important about setting up that identity. So William Pitt becomes foreign minister. He understands the colonial concerns. He says, I'll give you a compromise. If we can have your loyalty and your military cooperation, I mean, you fight with us, we will reimburse all the colonial assemblies for all the cost. And Lord London would be removed. They hated that guy. So the results, sure, we'll help you. We want to kick them out too. We'll help you. We'll be on board. And colonial morale increased by 1758. Little spoiler alert. Take note to yourself. Do you think that Great Britain is going to follow through on these promises? Hopefully you can tell by the inflection in my voice what that answer is going to be. So when the colonial militia begin to really fight, the tide turns for England. Without the support of the colonial militia, France probably would have been much more successful and perhaps have even kicked the British out of North America. So by 1761, Spain is now an ally of France. The tide turns for England. They start to push forward and move towards a victory. So in 1763, we have the Treaty of Paris, and this again will be where I tell you, if ever you are on any kind of game show and the United States is in a war and it ends in a treaty and they want to know what the treaty is and you don't really know it, you should always guess Treaty of Paris, because we've got a gazillion treaties of Paris. 1763, there's that date again, the Treaty of Paris. So what does this say? France loses all her Canadian possessions, most of her empire in India, and that will come back to be very important when we get to 1860, because Great Britain is a huge importer of southern cotton, and that is one of the things that the South thinks will help them. But because Great Britain had India, they moved there to get cotton instead. And they lose all the claims to lands east of the Mississippi River. Spain gets all the French lands west of the Mississippi River, New Orleans, and that'll be key, but lost Florida. And then England gets all of the French lands in Canada. So this is when England gets Canada. Exclusive rights to the Caribbean slave trade and commercial dominance in India. And this again shows you that even though for our U.S. history purposes we focus on the colonies, that this truly was a world war. If you look at all the movements of land as far as the treaty is concerned. So now look at North America in 1763. France is gone, except for way down here in Saint Dominique. Britain has all of this, and Spain now becomes the second largest. And again, considering this is all ice up here, probably the largest. And again, look at this little line. We'll talk about what this is later. But this again is North America in 1763. France is gone, and it's now just England and Spain. The effects of war on Great Britain. It increased her colonial empire in the Americas. Huge. And this is a big one. It's a giant one. England's debt. It is huge, and they need to pay it off. and we'll talk about that in a second when we get back in our notes. Britain's contempt for the colonials created bitter feelings. Therefore, England felt that a major reorganization of the American empire was necessary. This contempt is these colonials think they are equal to us, while the colonials are waving that equal freak flag. Yeah, we are equal. We're British. We are British citizens. And this will be one of the things that will lead us very, very quickly into this idea of revolution. This slide is really important. Number 2 and number 3, very important. Effects of the wars on the colonials. It united them against a common enemy for the first time. This was before the French and Indian War, 13 unique, different, separate colonists. And again, we spent a lot of time at the beginning of this course talking about how individualized each one of these colonies really were. And how are you going to get all of these colonies together? A colony founded on profit, a colony founded on this Puritan ideal that if you're not Puritan, you get kicked out. A colonies in the South founded on looking like England. How are you going to make all these people think the same? And one of the ways you did that was a socializing experience for all the colonials who participated. Get to meet people from these different areas. And number 3 is the most important. Nothing unites a group of people more so than bitter feelings toward a common enemy. So what if you're Puritan and I'm Church of England? Guess what? We all hate the British. And so that unifying factor will be profound. All right, I'm going to stop at that. Well, I'll go ahead because we'll get this one in the notes. I'll just go through it so that you can see Pontiac's Rebellion, but I will spend more time looking at this in our notes. Here's Pontiac's Rebellion on all the different attacks. Again, this happens in 1763. And the backlash will be one of the most important things that come out of this, the Proclamation Line of 1763. And again, I'm going to go back in our notes and draw more attention to this. Rethinking their empire, and this again where we stop. Okay, that's where we stop. All right, so let me go back here. Proclamation Line of 1763. So that's where we stop. Please make sure, again, I think my AP Euro kids said they actually really like these videoed lectures because they could pause me and stop and go back. But please make sure you really look at this PowerPoint and include some of this information in your notes. So this is lecture 1 today. Make sure you look at the second lecture because we're going to finish up the last set of notes today. All right, I will see you again in just a second.